Hello and welcome to An Old Man Watches, and today I'm going to be talking about the 1946 thriller Shock, so made just after World War II, which is relevant to the film itself actually. So the movie begins with a young woman named Janet Stewart checking into a hotel. Janet is there to meet her husband, who she hasn't seen for years because he was taken prisoner in the war and has only just been retrieved. Her husband is yet to arrive at the hotel, and Janet is understandably restless from the excitement to finally seeing him again after all this time. And so she ends up staying up very late, sleepless. Because of this, she hears a loud argument, and when she ventures out onto the balcony of her room, she witnesses a man strike his wife with a candlestick, killing her. When Janet's husband Paul arrives the next morning, he finds his wife catatonic from shock over seeing the murder. Paul consults with the hotel doctor, who gives Janet a referral to the foremost psychiatric doctor in the city, a certain Dr. Cross. Unfortunately for Paul and Janet, Dr. Cross is a rather venal man with a nasty temper, as his wife recently found out to fatal effect. So, Shock attracted some negative press when it was released, with at least one critic arguing that it was a social disservice to foster apprehension about psychiatric treatment at a time when so many people were suffering from shock and trauma due to the events of World War II. Now, that criticism may be drawing rather a long bow, or certainly feel like it's drawing rather a long bow as we sit here 75 years later, but I suspect that it was probably a more pressing issue in 1946. Conversely, not so pressing then, but certainly, I think, irksome to me today, is the film's blithe assumption that it's a perfectly normal feminine reaction to stress to retreat into a catatonic state. Some of the most emotionally and mentally strongest people I know are women. It's certainly not a normal feminine reaction. But in any case, to the matter at hand, is the movie any good? Well, honestly, I mean, the answer is not really. Let's talk about why. So, in my summary of the film's plot, I spoiled the big twist on offer, the fact that the man charged with curing Janet Stewart is the very murderer who caused her condition. And I generally, in these videos, try not to spoil too much about the movies that I discuss, but in this case, the twist happens early enough in the story and is sufficiently central to the whole scenario that I felt it had to be mentioned. And look, as twists go, it's not a bad one. It's the kind of thing you might see as the conclusion to an episode of a show like Alfred Hitchcock Presents, or a particularly dark episode of The Twilight Zone. The thing about a twist is that generally it comes towards the end of a story, recasting the previous events in a new light, or changing the current situation to create drama and tension for the final conflict. When you put it only about a quarter of an hour into your 70-minute film, you've given yourself a real structural challenge, and it's one that I don't think the film handles all that well. You see, Shock's answer to its self-created problem is to focus the narrative on the villains of the piece. You can see this in the credits. In fact, if you've noticed Vincent Price's name on the image on your screen, you probably won't be surprised to learn that he plays Dr. Cross. While he was still some years off his breakthrough role, 1953's House of Wax, his career was already heavily tending toward villainous roles. And Lynn Bari, meanwhile, plays Dr. Cross's assistant and mistress, a malevolent Lady Macbeth type who drips poison, figurative, not literal, into the not-so-good doctor's ear, and who is the driving force behind the various machinations to ensure that Janet never recovers to reveal the true story behind her catatonic state. So it's no surprise that the highest-profile cast members play the villains of the piece. Centering the story on Dr. Cross and his evil assistant is an inevitable consequence of the scenario. Janet, by definition, can't be our protagonist since she's trapped in a catatonic state, and Paul has no reason to suspect Dr. Cross and therefore no impetus to act. The problem with making the villains the main on-screen characters and the ones who have to carry the plot is that the film is rather left without anyone for the audience to sympathise with or cheer for. We're just kind of left to passively hope that Dr. Cross's evidently weak sense of integrity is enough to prevent his acquiescing to his assistant's more final solutions for the problem of Janet. And that makes, on the whole, I think, for a rather lethargic film experience. Shock felt a lot longer than 70 minutes. And I have to say, I think, that is in part because of that lethargic feel of the film. But I could probably forgive the film's glacial pace if there was something else to recommend it. Unfortunately, there really isn't. Price and Bari are solid in their roles, but the film overall looks cheap, certainly much cheaper than it apparently was, and a bit second-rate. But worse still, the script is so determined to cast Lynn Bari's character as the treacherous femme fatale, and the real driver of the villainous activity, that it starts to exhibit a creepy sense of apologism for the actual murderer, Dr. Cross. I mean, let's not forget, he is the one who actually killed his wife. The script seems to want to think that Dr. Cross isn't such a bad guy. I mean, he didn't want to hurt his wife. He just has a temper. And hopefully I don't need to explain to you everything that's wrong with that. I felt quite uncomfortable about some of the things that the film did in presenting Dr. Cross as not the real villain of the piece. And overall, I can't say that this is a film that I would recommend. So that's Shock. Next time, the box office failure credited with the demise of Square Pictures, the 2001 CGI science fiction film Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it.